Hello, greetings. Today, I'm glad to host Faisal Robla, an acute observer, analyst of our region. Welcome to the show, Faisal.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your invitation to share my view with you.
Very good. We'll be discussing the genocidal war on Tigray, and I'm glad, I have to be thankful that he is willing to share his thoughts with us today. Today is a Maulid Day, and I want to wish him a happy Maulid Day for you, Faisal.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad this comes from people and a son who comes from Tigray, where the first Muslim immigrants came to visit Ethiopia.
Yes, the first Hijra, yeah.
Thank you.
Al-Najashi.
Yeah.
Maulid, yes. Have you ever had a chance to visit the Al-Najashi Mosque in Tigray?
No, actually, but if I ever get the chance, I would like to visit northern Ethiopia, Tigray, Amhara region. Honestly, those are the areas that those of us who come from the east never had the chance to even see and visit. So, hopefully I will, including Wallo.
Yes, very good. Before we go to that, if you have some information about the ongoing meetings happening by the Prosperity Party in Jijiga these days, and what just transpired out of that, if there is anything you can share with us.
Thank you very much. So I think today is the second day, and tomorrow probably will be the concluding day of that meeting. From what I'm hearing, that most of the discussion by the leadership of PP is dominated by what some people are describing as inspirational speeches, probably owing to the Prime Minister's background and his evangelical Pentecostal background. There are no tangible issues that can really speak to the issue that the people, even in that region or in general, Ethiopia is facing: war, famine, genocide, displacement, but more of an inspirational speeches are being given that Ethiopia is on the right track and things are dandy and good. And something that really hit me in the guts when I heard the itinerary of the Prime Minister is that they will be visiting what's now promoted as cornfield, wheat fields outside Jijiga. These are really small farmers' projects. I'm very familiar with the area. My dad was born in that area. It's 5 miles outside Jijiga and up to 80 miles, 80 kilometers, sorry. And, the people who are now farming these small farms are people who either returned from displacement, internal wars have damaged them, and most of the families are even in camps or sleeping in tents. So what you see on the picture is this wheat fields are more of eye-catching demonstration on the big picture and on TV. But in reality, it's just the beginning of people who are coming back and farming their little plots of land. As you know, that area suffered huge and very devastating famine. So it's really very sad to promote such a small, tiny thing as if though it's a national project. I think the place doesn't have water system. People depend on the rainy season. So if the rain doesn't come, you cannot even depend on it. The land is beautiful and fertile and can be a breadbasket for wheat production. And it used to be like that when IPIL was there, when the Serbi program was helped by the World Bank. But these are more small people, small returnees from refugee camps who finally sat down and plotted their land. And for a prime minister of 120 million country to showcase that as the wheat production center. It's just, for those of us who know the reality, it's a sad commentary as opposed to being a big issue.
Interesting, but that is a typical character of the current leadership, isn't it? Making a mountain out of an anthill and trying to sell it to the outside world. And on the main topic we are going to discuss today, on the war on Tigray, we have been characterizing it as a genocidal war, and it seems the world is kind of gathering consensus around that. There are many now very serious intellectuals coming into agreement with that term, with that characterization. It's a huge war. Some of them, I think it's either you or someone I heard mentioning it or characterizing it as the World War of Africa, and that would be proper to call it, because there are many actors, many countries involved. Even some of them are outside Africa. Some of them are from the neighboring region. Taking all in consideration, it seems to be a huge and massive war. And this is, in terms of the casualties, time it has taken, the weaponization of many things, and all the moral borders, it's crisscrossing. And now, what is it to take from this one?
So, unlike many people who comment on the subject, I saw the genesis of atrocities and now probably genocide in 2018. I was in Addis Ababa in June, July 2018, the week that Isaias came. And there was a huge reception, including horses, gallop, for him to be welcomed from Pole Airport to the palace. And I was in the hotel and literally watching. Then the week after, on my way to Nairobi, I traveled and sat next to a young Tigray lady who was a medical doctor, who told me that she worked as a doctor in the city that Mustafa Muhammad Umar comes from, the Habub. Loved the Somalis, but she told me how they received her, how she helped them for many years. So we talked. And then she told me how the population from Tigray in Addis Ababa at that time felt the vibe, the anger, the hate. So I wrote an article at that time. It happens the week before I left Los Angeles. I visited the West Los Angeles-based Museum of Holocaust for a project with my kids. There is a little video that you watch as part of the tour. That video is some Jewish high society members, doctors and what have you, who are having a dinner with their friends who are Germans, who are saying, we feel the hate coming to us. We feel from officers and friends that we used to help or even give them medical. Can you guys do something? And the German elite would say, oh, no, it will never happen to you. And I was saying in that article, we are witnessing the fear that precedes pogrom and atrocity and genocide. To me, this, what we see today, really started incrementally in 2018. And I wrote an article on wardarenews.com, then 2018. And then July that year, I gave an interview to the BBC Somali program after I went to Nairobi, because I have a station in Nairobi. And I characterized Abiy as somebody who has no national principles, but religious doctrine, as before his Madamar came out. Because how did I arrive at this? I read the words that he was using. As a student of political science and social change, I could distinguish between somebody whose ideology comes from class struggle, social justice, and fixing a nation that wants to move ahead, vis-a-vis somebody who's getting his principles from the doctrine of theology. Abiy gets that, his theology. So the Tigray genocide did not start really in 2020. It exploded in 2020 because there have been grounds laid for, but to me, it started that time. Why? Why with Tigray? I think Abiy came to office with his Madamar philosophy that every ideology, if you read his book, every ideology in Ethiopia that we either borrowed or people believed in should be wiped out and be replaced with the new series of Madamar. Classical theory, Marxism, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's philosophies. He said all those are not applicable to Ethiopia. Madamar is the only thing that's applicable to Ethiopia. So that was one underlying factor why Abiy is doing what he's doing, and I will lead that to what happens. The second thing was Abiy came to office with a very strong, determined philosophy of a centrist government. He really thought that federalism was breaking Ethiopia, the Ethiopia that he envisioned. So this messianic belief in himself that he's the only one who can fix Ethiopia, just like Trump says, Abiy came to the conclusion that he has to wipe out federalism and go back to the grandiose of Ethiopia, where king is ruled and he may be a symbol of that and he may be a king. That he came with that philosophy to the office. And then the third was two factors. There was only one force that he saw standing in his way. That was the TPLF, TDF, Tigray region. And basically, he believed that one way to get to his goal was to destroy Tigray, not TPLF, but Tigray, because Abiy is not a charlatan when it comes to understanding bits and pieces of Ethiopian history. He probably knew that Tigray's struggle was, one with history and long, so his priority was to destroy the fabric of TPLF, but also the base, the social base that supports TPLF. In that case, if he destroys that, he will be that king that he promised to us in his book of Madamar, which was the seventh king. And I think those brought to us where we are today. If he didn't believe in those, I think Ethiopia would have been different. So you have that, and this is basically a debacle driven by one man's philosophy. It's not really a social upheaval like in the 60s and in the 70s, where the movement was coming from social groups with issues and ideology to fix or destroy or deconstruct something that we had. That was not it. This was a debacle that came on the heels of one man's philosophy, and we are paying the consequences today.
I just want to hear it from you on the level of atrocities we have seen, and if we are getting enough handle of it. How are you sensing the level of atrocities, the massiveness of the atrocities happening on Tigray?
Yes. So far, what we have heard or seen is information that has been gathered either by local people sending bits and pieces, or earlier reports from journalists who were later on evicted, or some scientific estimates by people who use satellites and then extrapolate from what they see into a data, someplace bombarded, and then the destruction and what have you. But I think when you talk to people whose families are impacted, and we're not talking about the soldiers and the massive loss of life in the front, which is now probably over 500,000, because before the third wave of the conflict, of the war, we were talking about 500,000 is dead. Now, easily the estimated number of people who have been killed in the front, both the east to south as well as up north in the Eritrean side, could easily go over 100,000. So we're talking about anywhere from 600 and up, and very soon 1 million casualty could easily be extrapolated. But when you talk to people from Tigray or read the reports, basically of the 6.5 million Tigrawa, probably there is no single person who is not impacted by this war in terms of relatives dying either by soldiers killing, by the rape carried by the Ethiopian soldiers as well as the Eritrean forces, by the lack of medication because of siege. I mean, this has never happened in the world, in the modern history, where close to 7 million people have been sieged, blocked from anything except what is inside. Whether it is services, whether it's medication, even Biafra was not like that. In the case of Nigeria's civil war in 1967, the Nigerian government, where Obasanjo was a colonel on the federal side, killing his own people, by the way, the food was used as a sort of torturing and starving people. But the complete siege never took place. In the case of Tigray, by using Afar region, by using Eritrea, and by using the rest of Ethiopia, that region has been sieged for almost 2 years. Next month will be 2 years. It never happened in the world. And for anybody to try to underestimate what the people went through is either themselves as part of the genocide or enablers of genocide, which in legal terms are almost the same. So I think what we see in Tigray is something that we haven't seen in the past. And when reports come out, and they will come out, no matter how long the siege stays, there are scientific ways to gather facts even after the war stops. In my opinion, what had happened in the last 2 years would change what Ethiopia used to be. The Ethiopia that we knew before 2020 will no longer be the same. How that will change, we can always guess, but in the hearts of the Tigray people, they would even be, in my opinion, farther removed from the concept of Ethiopia that we knew, more than Somalis, who probably for almost a century did not buy that concept. And now maybe more Ethiopians would know why Somalis were stubborn about not accepting the Addis Ababa's rule. Is because their atrocities has started in the 1920s, and it has been written by Western scholars abundantly. So I think what we're seeing in Tigray is unheard in Africa, unheard in Ethiopia, and unheard, or even if heard, rarely heard in the rest of the world. You see the Ukraine war, which is supposed to be huge, maximum. The death toll is in the low thousands, 10,000 maximum. We're talking here about 600,000, and nobody talks as much as we would like the world to talk about.
And counting. One other character that was prominent in this war on Tigray is the involvement of foreign forces. Eritrea has been a committed partner to this genocidal war. There were other countries that are being mentioned either by supplying some technological war machines to this, and I don't know how it ended up, or if it has gotten a closure. But there was also some Somali soldiers being trained in Eritrea, and that they were deployed on this war as well, fielded to Tigray. So walk me through the nature of the involvement of outside hands here.
So let me start with the involvement in inviting another country. Actually, I wrote and tweeted a couple of times by using some examples like that. It's like Kenya declaring war on the Luo, because the relationship between Luo and Kikuyu is the same as Amhara and Tigray war. Like that. So it's like Uhuru, or for that matter, Ruto, inviting Uganda, Rwanda, and probably Ethiopia to invade and fight against the Luo, whom he sees as his competition. It never happened. There are some examples in Africa where allied forces in the case of Uganda, to reinstall Obote in the 70s when he was overthrown by an illegal government. But this has never happened in the situation that we're looking at. But there is also a unique thing. Those of us who know the Ethiopian history, Eritrea is unique in the affairs of Ethiopia. Eritrea is part of Ethiopia, or was part of Ethiopia, fought alongside TPLF, EPRP, OLF, WSLF. And when the dictator of Derg was overthrown, their wish was honored to no longer stay with Ethiopia, but take their own lot the way they want, and took the two outlet to the sea that Ethiopia used to claim. I think a lot of people expected Eritrea would be a good neighbor. Its wishes were honored, and I'm one of those people who really see that as a positive. There are a lot of people who are now, kind of dying for Isaias. But 20, 30 years ago, they wouldn't even call the name Eritrea. They would not go beyond the name Shabiya, and they would blame TPLF and Tigray for letting Eritrea be created. This gives me a chance to remember a debate that went in the 1990s on the Ethiopian Review, for which I used to write, used to be the only voice from the South, who used to be a contributing editor. Dr. Abraham Kidane was from Eritrea, an economist, and somebody I knew very well, wrote a small article from an economist point of view, where he said Ethiopia would be the source for raw material, and Eritrea, because it had already industries, would be the processing center for the industries and what have you. It made the entire anti-federalism forces angry. I mean, in a way that you will never see. 40 years after, I think, yesterday, Alexei Diwal wrote an article proving the same thing, what Eritrea's intention was and is, that Eritrea cannot survive, and it's the belief of Isaias, unless A, he disintegrates Ethiopia, and B, unless he gets 100 of the Ethiopian raw material and resources. That's what Abraham Kadani was saying. Even Masfin Araya, who was at the time pro-centralist government, in my opinion, came against Abraham and supported the right-wing unionists, what have you. I think Isaias was never secret, in my opinion, as somebody who has been observing what he wanted of Ethiopia. He wanted Ethiopia with three images. Ethiopia that he would have the switch to disintegrate whenever he wants. That's number one. It was never a secret among Ethiopians, as well as now people like Indargacho Tsage, Burhanu Nega, suddenly just came to a different conclusion. And by the way, some people supported him for that. Like, some movements were in collaboration with Isaias on that. So that's one. The second thing, if he can get that, he would like to see Ethiopia as a source of raw materials and other things. If he can get that, the third scenario that Isaias would want Ethiopia is a weak, fragmented Ethiopia. After all, unless Isaias goes away and some new generation of Eritreans who believe in the brotherhood of the Horn of Africa come, and some reconciliation takes place at the grassroots, as well as up in the higher echelon, the philosophy that dominates the elite of Eritrean leadership, not the people, leadership today, is that if they can get those two, then they have to have Ethiopia that is weak, like the way it is today, somebody like Abiy, who, after with his 120 million people, could openly say, I cannot defend this country, but I need somebody like Isaias. And now some of the apologists for the Ethiopian government, such as somebody I listened recently, Misrat, who says that what can Abiy do? He can't protect his country, so he needs Isaias. That's what Isaias actually wanted Ethiopia to be. So he has where he wanted. He hasn't gotten the two options to disintegrate Ethiopia or to suck its raw material because the country is not functioning, so he cannot get that unless the looting and those things are carried. But he has the third scenario, which is Ethiopia today is rumored, and I cannot confirm that, but rumored to have moved the command and control of the Ethiopian army into Asmara. That may or may not be true. What is true is that Abiy in Arat Kilo today believes that Ethiopia cannot be defended without Eritrea, and that gives Isaias a huge muscle to directly or indirectly control the moves of Abiy and his entourage. They cannot do any move without him endorsing. The day they try to defy him, Ethiopia could change. Ethiopia could take a different direction. There may be a hope for reconciliation between Mekelle and Addis Ababa. Talks that are meaningful could start. But as long as Isaias has this way on Abiy believes that he cannot protect the territorial integrity of Ethiopia without Isaias, then nothing can move without Isaias first signing on it.
Interesting. And then while you are at that point, the puzzling element here is why would Abiy come into this level? Did he design it, or he just reached this level as a dynamic process of the conflict itself, and he became helpless? What do you say?
Abiy he is not rooted. He has no root in the Ethiopian intellectual movement, if you will, that later on turned it into a struggle. I mean, if you compare him to some of the people who took that, mental, you would not find Abiy anywhere until 2018. I think for him, Abiy, Ethiopia was a project that he never expected he would seize and control. And when it fall into his hand, right away, three things that he wanted to really see. Number one, Abiy is determined to be an autocratic ruler. He doesn't want to see anything other than autocracy. And with autocratic rule, you utilize every means, tools at your disposal to just stay on chair, including slaughtering people, including even killing your own family. And we have seen this history in the African literature. The third thing, I think, what is now emerging, that Abiy will give everything to Eritrea as long as they keep him on the chair, is that Abiy is aware of the fact that when and everything is done and things is settled, he has to answer questions pertaining to massive atrocities and genocide. Even if Ethiopians reconcile among themselves, the massive atrocities, rape, and genocide has been entered into the annals of the world. As you know, yesterday, the funding to extend the Human Rights Commission of the UN has been extended. This morning, the United States Department of State released as a news as their support and how happy they are. Irrespective of the reconciliation and talks, this thing has been registered in world history. Where will that take Abiy? He knows he doesn't have 100% guarantee. So he should stay and die on by the sword, and Isaias and Eritrea to him is one factor that keeps him on the power as long as those issues face him. If he didn't fear, and now I know he fears, and most people who can follow this issue know that Abiy, in the back of his mind, despite all the happy face that he puts, he doesn't sleep at night because he knows that he has to answer some of those issues. And that in itself makes him more of a monster on a daily basis than if he knew that the light at the end of the tunnel was more positive. It's not for him.
Interesting. Now let's move the spotlight to the bigger world. What is the international community or the global powers who can influence the political situation of our region? What are they missing about this conflict? What are they not understanding right?
So when we talk about international, we are talking about, on the one hand, US and the EU, and on the other hand would be AU, because other countries, like Latin America and what have you, are mostly, pulled into the process. I think there is a bit of a difference between US and the EU. The EU sometimes addresses, to the extent possible, issues of human rights, and a little closer to the reality than the US. I think what's happening with the US diplomats and politicians is that it's not that they don't know. Believe me, the US government has satellite images of everything that's happening. Everything that's happening. Cities being bombarded willy-nilly by the Ethiopian Air Force and Eritrean Air Force, mortars being hit in civilian population centers. They know more than even the people who are running the operation. No. But why aren't they doing something about this? I think there are two issues, in my opinion, that overlap, or at least. On the one hand, the diplomatic and political issue of America is no longer led by human rights values. It's led by realpolitik kind of thing. So instead of protecting the poor mother in Tigray, they would probably try to see if Abiy can listen to their advice, even when they know that he's not listening. So until they find a place where he listens, the death would continue, the massacre, the rape, everything, the destruction would continue, not only to Tigray, but also to now Amaras, Oromo. And, the second thing, American political thinking in the last 20 years, when it comes to the world and to Africa, are really shaped by two thinking, both of them unique to America. And this is my understanding. One, American politics is no longer about the big picture, it's about cultural war, cultural values. If you look at our elections, our America's internal issues, it's more of a cultural war than anything. That's why Islamophobia, the young lady who is killed in Iran, is more important than the thousands and thousands of Tigray women who have been raped in this war. They don't see that as a priority issue. But when they see an issue that they can hang on to and use against Iran, they jump on it. The last 2 weeks, 1 week, the entire US media has been covering two issues: the Ukrainian war and the Iran issue. Suddenly, because Iran issue fits the American cultural war about rape, about abortion, about Islamic issues. So that's one thing. Another thing is US political elite is always influenced by the issue of race. If you really are familiar with the theories of white privilege and Abraham Kindi's how to be anti-racist. Basically, Black people's lives, Black people's issues are on the back burner, way back. The same issues that you will see in the world, also in a microcosm happens in America. When somebody gets killed in a white neighborhood, vis-a-vis when 10 people are killed in a Black neighborhood, it's not addressed the same way. So my thinking is, if Tigray was, and Ethiopia for that matter, was a white country, I think the West would have handled it differently. So we are suffering in a way as totally, whether you call this the Tigray war, the Northern war, the Ethiopian war. I think as a community, as an African, but also in this case as an Ethiopian community, people are suffering because they are Black and they are expecting solution and influence from an America where the Black people don't become a priority issue. That's a reality that those of us who live in America know very well, and we cannot shy away from that.
I understand the order of importance and the indifference, if I want to call it that way, the Americans are in now with regard to this one. But the other agenda, like the keeping Abiy and keeping the Ethiopia integrated as one country and its continuity, is what are they sensing that they can achieve with Abiy other than without Abiy? How can a country like America not read this writing on the wall?
They know it. Absolutely, they know that Ethiopia is on the rough road at this point in time. And despite what they say about Ethiopia's territorial integrity and sovereignty, they know if it continues like this for another year, they may kiss goodbye to the Ethiopia that they like or they want to say they want to. What you hear from them is a diplomatic language to satisfy Abiy and pro-Abiy who now sit in Aret Kilo. It's also a message, a clear message that they are sending to our brothers and sisters of the Amhara community who, for right or wrong, married to the concept of Ethiopia Andinet or Ethiopia unity, not knowing that the very guy that they are supporting is destroying that Ethiopian unity they so much love. So what you hear from American politicians is not so much of a commitment as it is more of a diplomatic message to also show the other side that they are not walking away from them. Now, why is America not seeing that Ethiopia is on the wrong track and Abiy is on the wrong track? The State Department has a lot of expertise who analyze social issues like this, and they know that Ethiopia's unity is at stake, very dangerous. And they know that if things go this way, they will not see that. So they have several options that they could do, and they are not doing at this point in time, but they could easily do. One easily fruitful process for them, if they were really so serious to not waste everybody's time and do something about this, would have been to force and use their economic muscle on Abiy and bring some sort of resolution, quick resolution that's meaningful to the two warring faction first. And I'm those who prescribe to the theory that says, first you bring the two sides who are in war, then bring everybody else. The second thing is they could have easily, after that, done with Isaias by bringing Ethiopian forces together and making a project about Isaias. They have done in the past. It's very easy. Isaias only fears of one group in Ethiopia, and that's the Tigray forces, TDF. So they could do that too. And they know how to do that, the formula. They did that with Russia when the Mujahideen of Afghanistan were fighting and carrying their, anti-aircraft shoulder. They know that. Now, why aren't they doing this why are they crying about Isaias and not doing anything? I think they are suffering, in my opinion, the white man syndrome. And how is that? One Black American conservative scholar wrote a tiny book called The Content of Our Character Shall Be Still. He said a white liberal hates one thing in the world. A Black progressive calling a white liberal, you're a racist, they don't want to see that. America doesn't want to see AU and African corrupt leaders, not good African leaders, even African corrupt leaders calling America, you are this or that. So basically, their hands seem to be tied. They will beg AU to do something, but they are afraid of what AU and Abiy and Ethiopian leaders have built that. Now, AU, the unfortunate thing that happened to us as Africans is that post-colonial African leaders have put this OAU and then AU that became a club where former dictators, entourage, and former ministers and former high-level officers sit at the table. And you don't expect the ones who didn't rule Africa well in their own countries to also. So those are the ones who are tying America. But America can literally put the chess and create several scenarios, one of which can really help the world, help America, help Ethiopia by just playing the right card. And they won't do that because of many factors. One, they themselves don't care so much about Africa. Number two, Africa doesn't feature in the American political cultural war as much as, say, Iraq or Iran or the Arab world it features. And the third is our own AU is so reactionary that they will tell America, even if 2 million Tigrayans die, they will say, leave to Obasanjo. He's the one who will fix it. Not knowing that Obasanjo himself participated in a formal genocide in the African context. And that's what the AU is.
So you spoke about AU and AU. Recently, there was a consensus among the world leaders and Africans that the AU should lead the mediation, the peace talk or the mediation process. And the way it handled was so messy. It's not that it's not helping the situation. It's just complicating it further and further. And share your thoughts with me, if you will, how the AU is handling, and it's like bordering being part of the conflict at all, which is very unfortunate. It will be a very, very bad mark on its history, I guess.
Yeah. So that's the unfortunate. Yesterday, today would have been a big deal for Ethiopia and those who love peace, because a lot of people expected the first round of talks would have started. Even Mike Hammer, U.S. envoy to the Horn, and Ethiopia is in Nairobi. He was in Nairobi Thursday and participated at this beautiful panel put together by United Women of the Horn, where he opened and very enthusiastic. A lot of other delegations in Nairobi to fly to, What's very interesting is the last minute revelation that former President Uhuru was never consulted on anything. He just saw his name. You don't do that to a elementary child, a school who is playing soccer. You give them, at least if they're playing the soccer for Saturday, you tell them Wednesday to get their gears ready and give them the address and the flyer and who they playing with. I coached soccer, so I know what, how, even for elementary kids. For Uhuru, such a very buoyant and active and productive person, two things. I think number one, I have a hunch, and I could be wrong, but when I look at the two characters, Uhuru and Obasanjo, I think there was a fear on the part of Obasanjo that this buoyant, articulate, well-spoken former president of Kenya who has more affinity with Ethiopia for historical reasons, probably would overshadow Obasanjo in the AU chair. That's number one. I think I cannot subscribe myself to conspiracy theory, but I don't know how much the Ethiopian government of Abiy Ahmed was in the background to also sabotage this. But I think it's more likely the AU's office. But it could also be incompetence. Because even two things, first of all, according to President Uhuru, he was not being given enough time. You check with a president like him, whose schedule is very tight. You and I have been arranging this interview for over 2 weeks to just align your time, my time. They should have, according to him, and there's no reason why he would lie. He was not told and given enough time to open his calendar for this. That's number one. Number two, as a highly skilled person, he expected a number of issues, rule of engagement, issues to be talked, how they would be talked, what each role would be. I mean, honestly speaking, this is an area that I deal with on a daily basis, commissions, hearings. These things are arranged to the finite minute, who takes what, who does with, how the hours go, and people who go to conference, they even do this. For them not to share an outline and everything with Uhuru, they just wanted President Uhuru to be angry and not show up. But you know what? He turned this around in a beautiful way by putting the issues on the table and by saying that at this point in time, talks would be meaningless as long as Tigray is under siege and as long as the guns are not silenced. So I think those two things that he put on the table may even inadvertently help the people of Tigray, the people of even Amara region, who are to a certain extent also suffering this war because of Abiy utilizing that region. And also probably the world will now say, we have to wait to have talks before we address those two issues President Uhuru raised. So in a way, this inadvertently may help the process in a positive way.
So now let's bring the ball into the court of the Ethiopians, Tigrayans amongst, and at the end of the day, it's their fate, their future, their life, and Ethiopians are the ones that could really bring meaningfully to this conflict to an end. In a way, it preserves their country and their values, and the Tigrayans are on the receiving end for the most. So what will be the best way the common people can do, activists, I don't know, intellectuals, scholars, institutions, what do you see as a way out of this all crisis and mess?
Yeah. So I think we have a long way to go to really bring Ethiopia's conflict, into its resting place. I mean, in the last 70 years, Ethiopia every 10, 20 years sees major wars and conflict. And in the meantime, conflicts are also always intermittently happening all over. I think that comes from Ethiopia's unique state formation, in my opinion. Ethiopia is not like other African states, where African states are post-colonial states. Ethiopia is pre-colonial state. Some people call it empire. Other people call it something else. But the very fact that Ethiopia is a different state needs to address its issues. It's not the same way you address Kenya or whatever. So there is a lot of digging and heart-to-heart discussion, honest discussion that a lot of Ethiopians would want in order to live together. You cannot really simply say, take it or leave it, like some people would say. No, Ethiopian state needs to be understood, needs to be, dig deeper and deeper so that everybody sees past, present, and future. You cannot completely say don't talk about the past. People talk. What is happening today in Tigray will be part of the history repository that people will be using when they want to challenge the Ethiopian central government. There have been others, Somalis, Afaris, Oromo, Amara, even now to a certain extent. So a holistic understanding of what Ethiopia's state is needed. I think secondly, so that's the long term I see. I think what can be done, I think people should really right away see how they can eject Eritrea out of Ethiopia. That should be top of the issues. How can you push back Eritrea, take Eritrean soldiers to the barracks, and make sure that Eritrean soldiers don't shoot any more bullet into Tigray, which is part of Ethiopia. And those Ethiopians who are really not lauding this issue, they're just contributing to the disintegration of Ethiopia. Yeah, whatever reason they have. That's number one. Number two, if anybody wants Ethiopia to get to the second stage, which is talks, the war we have seen. The second stage, which is talks, they have to loudly, like one person that I listened, speak about the siege. There is no hope for Ethiopia, in my opinion. No hope. Quote me if you want. There is no hope for Ethiopia to coexist as long as Tigray people are continuing to live under siege. It just produces new generation to hate and fight against Ethiopia by the day. So anybody who wants to even negotiate on the state formation of Ethiopia and see where Ethiopia can go from here, from pain to healing, or from challenge to opportunity, they need to make sure that the siege is removed and everything be that Tigrayans have, as other Ethiopians have. Whether they have hunger together, whether they have plenty together, I don't see what satisfaction Abiy gets from a mother who has a breast cancer to not receive her medicine. I just don't. The third issue is, I think while the international focus is on bringing the Guineas to silence and the siege to be lifted, and the big conventions are taking place, we need to also start talking at the grassroots level. I think as a very budding and growing Somali group called Congress for Somali Cause has prepared a very attractive piece I read, proposal to bring multinational Ethiopian groups together to just, until the world is talking about silencing the Guineas, to also talk about how the modalities that people can resolve this conflict and also move. I'm a believer that if people work together, I think things that have gone wrong can be corrected. If South Africa, after so many years of apartheid rule, can work together and give a healing space to each and every person, if Mandela and his Dick Clark, his opposition, can sit down and talk, there's no reason why Tedros and Kabere cannot talk, or Bakale and Gamere cannot talk, or Faisal and Daddy cannot talk. Some issues can be relegated to phase 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. But I think the talking among the community should start, and that's how I viewed last week's United Women of the Horn, that encompassed everybody, gurus that I have never seen speaking at the public command, other gurus, Kambata, Hadiya. Ethiopians need to start talking and see how they can resolve beyond the current conflict. And I think that's why I said the Somali Congress has already really put proposal, and I like that proposal to be shared to the extent possible. Maybe sometimes the person who is a little far from the conflict can probably, and who has seen pain themselves in the past, can see both the pain as well as how to really, because you see today Somalis who were blocked under EPRDF rule in 2010 are the ones who are advocating for Tigray people. So they know both the bad and the good and the ugly. So I think people are ready. And one last thing, I honestly believe, unlike the 1970s and 1980s, the Amara elite is missing in the equation to stop the war and bring resolution to the conflict. The Amara elite has been hijacked by people like Tigray, whom I wrote an article in 2019 when I was going somewhere and I just saw people gathering and I sat there and listened. And when I listened to his speech, I wrote an article, not even knowing deep who he was, the venom, the anger, the fascistic attitude toward some people. I think there has to be, like Tamrat Layana's recent call, or the other guy, I'm missing his name. Lidatu. I think rational, with differences. That doesn't mean you agree with them 100%. But Amaras are blessed with a lot of intellectuals and elites, and even some past revolutionaries and progressives. I think they have been dominated. They are not the first one. I know of several other African situations where the progressive elite has been hijacked by a mob who sees only one issue and they have been subjugated. The Somali region is the same way today. The progressive ideas have been subjugated to servants of PP, and even your families will be harassed when you speak up like myself. But that's fine. I think we need to bring that unity that Ethiopians have known for many, many years, all the way from the Walalen days to the 1970s and 80s, and just see how, because no solution will come from outside. That I know. No solution. The 1990 overthrow of the Derg didn't come from outside. It was a culmination of a struggle that have been carried east, west, north, south, and finally one or two gurus that structured a mechanism to take down the Derg came and walked into Addis Ababa. And that is the decisive. And I think we have to find progressive Amaras to play their role and responsibility. Otherwise, if they're claiming to be the ones who love Ethiopia most, they're not showing that in practice. Their practice doesn't show that today.
Thank you, my brother Faisal Roble, on sharing all those insights, very good insights. Thank you, and we should have you more often. And that's a goodbye from me for now. Hopefully, I might have you for next Saturday on with a different medium. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us.
I appreciate the opportunity you gave me. Thank you very much, and hopefully, yes, we will stay in touch.
Very good. Okay. Viewers, that was the conversation I have with our guest today, Faisal Roble, and that's a goodbye from me. Thank you as well.